Well, joining us for more on these issues is Reserve's Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, and Ambassador Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Gentlemen, thank you for joining. Michael, I'm going to start with you. This meeting, of course, today between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, many are looking at it as a potential turning point in the war or towards its finish. Before we break down some of the specific points, just your general impression about what are the chances that this really will be, you know, an opportunity to bring the war to its conclusion and free the hostages.
Good to be with you, Kalev. I can't assign an actual percentage of a chance. You know, I've read this proposal in detail to what has been published so far, and I've written about it. And on paper, it seems to be a cogent, compelling argument. Hamas has to accept the fact that it has lost this war. Hamas has to say that it has lost, that it is willing to lay down its arms. Those Hamas members who want to stay in Gaza have to actually swear, they have to take an oath that they will forswear terrorism, that they'll accept basically the peace process, accept Israel's right to exist. Those Hamas officials who do not want to take that pledge will be put on a boat and shipped elsewhere overseas. And on the other side, the Israeli government is not going to have to agree to discuss what the Saudis have called a pathway to Palestinian statehood, which is a very high hurdle for the present government of Israel and in the coalition. So to tell you whether there is going to be a tremendous chance that Hamas is going to surrender or that Mr. Smotrich and Ben Gvir are going to discuss Palestinian statehood and end the war, I can say there's not a very high chance. Having said all that, though, President Trump wants this war ended. It wants it ended either by military means or by diplomatic means, by negotiations, and it wants it over quickly. He wants it over quickly. He wants to proceed on Saudi-Israeli peace. He wants that Nobel Peace Prize, which I think he deserves richly. And so Prime Minister Netanyahu is heavily dependent on Mr. Trump right now. He's what's standing between us and international sanctions. And Prime Minister Netanyahu will do everything possible to accept this peace deal. And Hamas may play it as Hamas has always played it, which is to say, we accept the deal, but with all sorts of reservations, and let's talk about it.
Right. And Jonathan, how are you feeling about this deal? And maybe the question of does it answers Israel's security concerns? Because there's a lot of novel features in this deal, including, for example, a multinational Arab-Muslim force in or around Gaza, something Israel has never really had to deal with.
Yeah. So I agree with what Ambassador Oren said, always words of wisdom from him, but I'll say this. The first Trump plan to end the war was probably undercooked. It's a good idea to get Gazans out, rebuild the place, get Gazans back in, and to completely change the trajectory of the Gaza Strip. That wasn't made diplomatically well enough, and President Trump didn't have the Turks or the Egyptians or the Europeans or the other Arabs on board, so that plan didn't happen. This plan seems better cooked. There's more buy-in by regional and local players, but I would still say that the scale of naivete, there's a lot of the 21 points are pretty high on the scale of naivete, because to ask Hamas to renounce terrorism and to disarm, lay down their weapons is, I think, 100% contrary to their very core beliefs and their real ethos as mukawama, as resistance, as they see themselves. And I think that the likelihood of that happening is very low. I also think that as long as that doesn't happen, and I don't think it will, then I struggle to see any foreign Arab international peace force that will actually come in and face reality on the ground, which will be low intensity or mid intensity fighting, guerrilla and terrorism. So whereby I totally agree with what Ambassador Oren said, there's a lot of pressure on Israel and on Hamas's backers, on Turkey and on Egypt and Qatar to make this deal now and get it done. At the end of the day, Hamas, I think, will probably refuse, and they will try to use Israeli refusal in order to pin the blame on Israel.
Right. And as you both pointed out, there's elements here that Hamas has already said they'll reject disarmament, but there are also a couple of problematic points for Israel or this current Israeli government, the introduction of the Palestinian Authority or a reformed PA at some point in the governance of Gaza, the other renewal of peace talks with the aspirations of Palestinian statehood as an ultimate goal. How much? Both things Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected as recently as the UN, speaking to the UN General Assembly last week. Michael, how much wiggle room does the Prime Minister have here to say yes, but?
Not much, as I said earlier. We are facing international isolation. The Prime Minister has said as much. Remember the Sparta remark. And what is standing between us in that isolation is one person. It's Donald Trump. President Biden used to say don't. You remember that, Caleb? Said don't. And everybody did, including the Palestinians, the Iranians, and Israel did. When Donald Trump says don't, this Prime Minister is going to have to think many, many times before he goes ahead and goes against the will of this president. And that extends not just to discussing this pathway to a Palestinian state or PA involvement in those negotiations or in that final arrangement, but also the question of annexation, which the Prime Minister is under mounting pressure within his coalition to agree to a partial or complete annexation of Judea and Samaria. And Donald Trump has expressed himself unequivocally against this. It's not the first time. He did it even his first term in office as well. So Netanyahu has to tread very, very carefully to avoid a head-on collision with this president. And we saw at the UN last week, Kalev, on the question of Ukraine, how this president can change positions very, very quickly. Right. We cannot afford that.
Right. And Jonathan, again, you both mentioned Hamas likely to refuse some of them, but there is one point in this plan that specifically says that if one of the parties don't agree, meaning Hamas, some of the changes can be implemented in areas that are already secure, meaning are under IDF control. How likely is that happen while the IDF is still operating, that is going to be able to meet some of these conditions, introduce some kind of, like, for example, new civilian administration in Gaza?
Yeah, I think the game changer here could be Egypt. And if President Trump will inform the Egyptians that he's had enough of them blocking Gazans from getting out, and that he wants a temporary solution for Gazans out of Gaza into Sinai, that could be the virtual rug being pulled beneath the feet of Hamas, and that could really be the game changer that shuffles the cards and really rebalances the situation in Israel's favor, actually in Palestinians' favor, but to the disfavor of Hamas. I think we're getting more and more indications that there's less patience with the Egyptians in DC, and that more and more people are understanding that their obstructionism and frankly their cruelty towards Gazans is what has been one of the reasons why Hamas has been able to hold on for so long. In addition to the hostages that they took, are 48 hostages that are still there and need to be brought back. But the fact that they have been keeping the gates closed is something that has allowed Hamas this wiggle room and diplomatic oxygen. If that changes, if Hamas refuses Trump's proposal, and then pressure is applied on Egypt, that could be the game changer that Hamas really doesn't want, but that could be really good for Israel.
Right. And speaking of good for Israel, Michael, one of the potential benefits here, obviously the release of the hostages first and foremost, the end of fighting in Gaza, but perhaps expanding the Abraham Accords, bringing some more Arab and Muslim states. But the plan doesn't specifically cite any commitment by those states to do so. So what are the chances that this will bring more states, and should that be something that should be more forthcoming in the process?
Well, let's be honest with ourselves here. Hamas is not going to release all the hostages. Hamas is evil, but it's not stupid. And Hamas knows that the day it releases the last hostage is the day that the IDF goes in there and destroys Hamas. And not surprisingly, in the last few days, Hamas has said, well, we don't know where they all are. There are several who are missing, accounted for. And that was entirely expected. One would have expected in a negotiation under normal circumstances that the United States would offer a sweetener to the Israelis, say, okay, make a concession on this pathway. Make a concession about a possible involvement of a reformed Palestinian Authority in the future. God knows what reform means and whether the Palestinian Authority is capable of reforming itself. Make those gestures, and the United States will compensate you with a peace agreement, for example, with Saudi Arabia, or we'll bring Indonesia into the Abraham Accords, or Azerbaijan, which is kind of low-hanging fruit. Who knows? Maybe in Pakistan into the Abraham Accords, and that will enable Netanyahu to go back to his coalition, go back to his contingency in the Likud, and say, look, we're making a sacrifice, but look what we're getting. We're getting peace with the Sunni world and the possible bonanza worth hundreds of billions of dollars in trade. He could do that. But the question is whether now, in our weakened position, vis-a-vis the world in this war, Israel has that type of leverage. It had that type of leverage back in 2020, where in exchange for not annexing Area C of Judea and Samaria, Israel was able to get the UAE to join the Abraham Accords. I don't know if we have that same leverage today, but that certainly would be a sweetener, Kalev, for Netanyahu to go back to the Israeli public and say, look what I'm getting for making what is essentially a symbolic gesture to the Palestinians and the Arab world.
And Jonathan, as you both have said, there's a good chance this deal may not succeed. Or if it does, it's still going to be a while towards implementation. In the meantime, IDF forces are on the ground in Gaza, operating in Gaza City. How do you see that operation, if that is the case, and the war must go on, how do you see it progressing now in the next weeks or even months?
Yeah, I just came from the Gaza border, actually, so I heard a lot of the noise, and I spoke with a lot of the people on the ground. I would say that it's basically talks and tanks. My friend at FDD, Mark Dubovitz, he just coined that, and I'll credit him. It's talking and tanks on the ground. That's what's happening. And Israel is still using the military on the ground in order to apply pressure on Hamas and to show Hamas that this can get much worse if you continue to hold on to the hostages and to refuse to surrender. And things are happening in DC, which is part of that pincer movement. On the ground, there still, unfortunately, is a lot of Hamas infrastructure. There are a lot of Hamas fighters that are still capable of fighting, that if Israel wants to actually win the war, they need to either be killed or to surrender, or for a political agreement to be achieved. I am very concerned about the hostages. The situation isn't positive, and I think that that is the ultimate ace up Hamas's sleeve when it comes to applying pressure. So Israel is applying pressure on the ground, and politically, Hamas still has those hostages. And I agree with the assessment of Ambassador Oren. Hamas are extremely evil, but not stupid.
All right, talks and tanks. I think Winston Churchill said, better jaw than war.
Right.
But it looks like we're going to have plenty of both, at least in the coming days. Jonathan Conricus, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And Ambassador Michael Oren, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you to you both, and Gemar Chatima Tova. Thank you.
Bye-bye.